Okay, welcome. So we're going to be working on composite matching over today. And I have about 8 different files that we are going to kind of open up. We're going to go through the different techniques to use to color correct and to composite our images together to make them look realistic as we have several layers to match as if we were taking that image with one camera rather than a bunch of different cameras and a bunch of different images. So it's one of those projects where if you do it correctly, nobody notices and it's thankless, right? So nobody's gonna go to you when they see that image and say, hey, that was a really great job. It's just gonna look like a natural image. And if nobody notices and nobody says, hey, great job with that, you should take that as a great job because it's when people notice things that's actually what you don't want, because then it kind of takes you out of that image. So we'll start over here with this image 1997. I'm just going to drag that over to Photoshop real quick, and as it opens, we're going to see that it is very green cast on there. So we want to correct that green cast, and one of the ways we can do that is a combination of using levels and curves. Levels will help us sort of work on the light and dark areas and the contrast. And it might actually help us a little bit with some of the color. But really where we're going to notice a big difference is working with curves. So we'll start off with an adjustment layer. So again, you can go to layer, new adjustment layer, and select it from there. Or we can go down to our layers panel down here and select from there. Wherever your mouse is, you can go ahead and click on whichever one. And I'm actually going to go ahead and start with levels just to see if we can kind of use our color pickers over here to tease out some of that green and make it more natural, right? Because there's a lot of green in there. So we can actually use these color pickers over here in our levels by selecting the darkest spot with the black color picker, and then selecting the lightest or whitest spot with the white color picker. And usually it does a pretty decent job of automatically sort of finding and removing the color cast, because what it likes to do is when you click on this white color picker and you select an area from the image, it likes to look at the RGB or the CMYK value of that particular pixel that you clicked on, and it sort of does a little bit of a calculation. It says this is supposed to be white, and if there's a lot of G in the RGB and I need to remove that green to make it white, then I'm going to apply that to all the other pixels in that image. So we kind of have to find or pick what we think is the whitest point in our image. And I'm going to sort of select his shoulder over here. I think that's probably going to be the lightest part of the image. And it's kind of up to us to kind of visualize and determine visually what that is. Same thing with the black. We want to pick the darkest color, or the one that matches black with the black color picker, and that'll get us an okay way there. It's not going to be the final step or anything like that. We'll still have to use our curves, but it'll kind of help with the lighting a little bit and that color cast a little bit. So if I click over here on this white area, it brightens it up very nicely for me. but it doesn't do a perfect job, right? I still have behind the glass over here a lot of green, and there's still a lot of green inside over here, right? So one of the things I'm also going to do is pick the black color picker and pick the darkest part of the image. So I think that's probably going to be the pants around here, maybe. Yeah, I'm gonna go with the pants down here. Somewhere over here seems like it'd probably be the darkest because there's a lot of shadow there. So I'm gonna click on that, and that's gonna make that black. So that's my, that is my darkest spot in the image. From here though, like I mentioned, like I mentioned, still not perfect, right? There's still a lot of green in there, but it helped with the jersey. So my next step is actually to use curves, where I'm going to have a lot more control over each channel, the red, the green, and the blue, and I'll be able to adjust it. So same idea, same concept. I'm going to click on my adjustment layer over here, and I'm going to click on curves, and that's going to give me this chart over here, and what I'm looking for in this chart is highlights, midtones, and shadows. And depending on where I select from, that's the area that that's the colors and the areas that I'm going to select. If I have RGB selected from this dropdown, it's going to affect all three channels. So I'm just going to be affecting highlights, midtones, and shadows for the entire image. So if I wanted to lighten up the shadows a little bit, down here in the lower left-hand corner, I'm affecting my shadows. And I can kind of almost tell, it's kind of got a nice guide for me. This light area on top all the way down here, and it's kind of getting darker and darker. And I have on this y-axis. And then I have a dark to light axis on the bottom over here. And that kind of shows me my shadows in the dark areas. In the gray areas over here are my midtones. And up here in the white and white are my highlights. So the things that are the brightest in the image versus the sort of in between, all the way to the darkest parts of the image. And if I wanted to adjust those universally, I can keep the RGB drop down, and I can use one of two methods. One, I can directly apply the changes to this graph, knowing that these are my shadows, these are my midtones, and these are my highlights. And I can kind of bring the levels up or down by clicking on this graph and literally moving it. So if I wanted to affect my shadows down here for the entire image, I can drag and adjust how dark or how light I want my dark areas to be by moving it around like this in that area. Right? So I can kind of see that it's getting really washed out and bright. Okay, and same thing for my highlights. I can kind of move it around and decide how I want, how dark or how bright I want those areas to be. Same thing with my midtones. If I click over here, it's going to start creating a curve, and I can adjust how dark or light my midtones are. Okay. And then if I make a mistake or if I don't want that point anymore, I can just hit delete, and that removes that point from there. But another method is to kind of be a little bit more visual about it. So if there are midtones, highlights, or shadows that I want to affect in a certain area, I can use this tool over here that looks like a hand with a couple arrows going up and down. And if I click on that, I'll be able to actually adjust that in the image itself. So I can go over here into the image, and actually when I'm hovering over this image, you can kind of see on that graph where I'm affecting the image. So over here, on this area where I have my color picker, that's somewhere in between the midtones and the highlights. If I put in a really dark area, I'll notice that that little circle over here is going to move to the darker areas. So if I go over here, for example, it's all the way in the bottom left-hand corner. If I go to the top over here, I'm working with the highlights. So I can kind of see where that little circle is on the graph. And instead of using the graph, I'm using the image. And then when I click and move my mouse up and down, that will affect the area, either the highlights, midtones, or the shadows. So for example, I'm right over here. If I click and I move up and down, I can affect that curve up and down and sort of visually see that change here. Okay. Whoa. Okay. We're gonna select this one, and we're gonna hit delete and go back. Okay. So that's universal with the RGB. You're essentially affecting the red, green, and blue together. That being said, we can separate our channels out. So we can specifically choose red, green, or blue. In our case over here for this image, there's a lot of green in our image. So we really want to take that green out of our image. So I'm going to switch to my green channel. And depending on the image, you may have to make a decision of removing green or adding more green. Removing the red from the image or adding more red from the image, etc. And you might have to play around with several channels to get you where you need to be. This one's a little bit more simple because it's green and we know right away that, hey, there's a lot of green and yellows in here. Let's remove some of the green. So if you're not sure if you need to remove a highlight or a shadow or a midtone, that's where that tool comes in handy over here. So if you click on that and go over here in this green area, behind the glass, there's a lot of green there. If we want to remove those, they're going to be somewhere around where that circle is. On the other hand, if we go somewhere over here in the darker areas, that green is going to be on the lower left-hand side that we're going to be affecting. So it's a great way to kind of visualize where it is on the graph that you're affecting and where it is on the image that you're affecting. Great visual way to adjust things. But yeah, if we want to get rid of all that green over here, I'm going to click over here in this area in the back, and then I'm going to move my mouse up or down to either add more green, have it more intense, or pull it back so there's less green in the image. Sometimes when you do pull back a little green, as you can see from this gradient over here, you might be adding a little bit more magenta or red to the image because you're pulling away the greens. That's a guide as well for you, just to give you an idea of what is going to happen. So let's click on this area over here, and then I'm just going to bring the green down by moving my mouse down over here. And don't want to go too extreme, but I also want to go, I'm looking for a nice balance over here. So that gets rid of a lot of the green in that area over here. And now it's looking a lot better, right? I can actually make out that his jersey over here is supposed to be a little bit more maroon. And if I needed to go into the shadows a little bit, or maybe down the ice over here, I can also adjust and bring some of that down. Maybe that's a little bit too much, so sometimes you kind of have to be really careful, but that's looking pretty good. But now there's a lot of yellow over here in the background. So we might want to go to our levels too and kind of adjust our levels too, because it seems like it needs to be just a little bit brighter over here. And maybe our midtones need a slight adjustment over here too. And that's looking a lot more natural than it did before. If we want to get super into it, we can also go into our red channel over here. And as we can kind of see, there's a little bit of yellowness to it. We can kind of pull back a little bit on the red and see how that goes over here. If we pull down a little bit, that's actually kind of turning more greenish. So that's the opposite of what we want. All right. That's making it a little bit too yellow, so that's not what we really want. So if it's not the red channel that's giving us the result that we want, then we might need to go into the blue channel, right? If I add more blue to it, that might actually remove some of the yellow. So let's experiment with that. Let's go into the blue channel over here. And as you can see on the blue channel over here, down here, I see some yellow. So if we add a little bit more blue, bringing it up a little bit, that should kind of counteract some of the yellow that's in that image. So again, I'm kind of going to select this tool. And in this area where it's really yellow, I'm going to click. Whoops. What happened there? Let's try that again. Go into my blue channel, click my tool up here, and then kind of add a little bit more blue in here. And that's kind of getting rid of that yellow in that image over here. Right, so that's getting rid of that yellow. And now it's looking a little bit brighter back here. Okay, I want this blue maybe to be a little bit more intense, so maybe I'll click on that blue and add a little bit more blue there. And now it's kind of looking cold too, right? Because as we add a little bit more blue, blue kind of has this feeling of coldness, right? We can control temperature with red and blue, right? A little bit more blue feels a little colder, a little bit of orange or red kind of makes the environment seem a little bit warmer. But that's how we would kind of color correct. Each individual channel allows us to adjust the highlights, midtones, and the shadows of that color range. So that is the curves adjustment layer. And if we turn off our levels and curves, we can see a huge difference. And we can see a lot of color that came back in, a lot of detail in that hockey player here. The jersey looks white and maroon now instead of black or green and almost kind of a black and white green casted image. Cool. So that is the curves adjustment layers. And of course, you can do that on every individual layer that you need to do as well, not just for the entire image. So if you have a clipping mask on a layer that's already cut out, or if you have a mask on that image, then you can control individual layers that way as well, which we will get into in the next example here. Yeah, we're gonna get into the next step for that. Yeah. So the next step is we are going to use this color match PSD file. So I'm gonna go ahead and open that one up, and I'm gonna see that I have two different layers here. And for this one is exactly what you had with your question, matching the color in the background from the foreground to the background, from our subject to our background. And what I want to do is I'm going to show you two different ways to do this because Photoshop has a neural filter now that can do some of the work for us, but with any filter in Photoshop or any automated process in Photoshop, it's not always going to be perfect, right? So it's going to depend on the images that you're using. So it's always good to know the old school method and the manual method of color matching, because you'll have a lot more control than the automated process gives you. So we'll start with the manual process first, and that is basically again, we're going to use adjustment layers for this. So we're going to use curves, and we're going to use levels to get us to where we want to be within our image here. So right now it kind of looks a little bit, it looks okay, but it's not quite there in terms of the color matching and the lighting. So we're gonna make a little bit of an adjustment. For our background layer, I think we kind of wanna change the levels a little bit just to adjust the dark areas and the lighter areas, so that it matches a little bit more with our subject over here. Because we have a lot of dark in the shirt down here, but the background layer over here, we have a lot of, well, lighter grays, right? So we kind of want to match that. So we're going to take a method of matching our background to our subject and our subject to our background together. So first up, we're going to use some levels for this background layer. I'm going to go into my adjustment layers and click on levels, and then I'm just going to look at my chart over here, and I can see that I'm not getting the full range of dark colors, that I have a bunch over here that's missing. So I'm going to clip that so that the darkest area is where the shadows spike. So I'm just going to slip that over here like that, and then this dark area now matches the dark area of her shirt. It's a little bit darker, but I clip that range so that the darkest areas are actually the darkest areas. So a little bit of before and a little bit of after. So that kind of gives the background a little bit more of a natural feel for the subject. Our subject is already cut out, right? So we can take her in and out, transparent background on her. So what we're gonna do over here then is we are gonna create a new adjustment layer, and we're gonna use some curves to add a little bit more warmth, right? Now that we kind of lowered the levels of our background, that sunset looks a little bit more vibrant. It looks a little bit darker. The red and the orangey, pinkish sort of glow that the sun gives out is a little bit darker than it was before, right? So it gives a little bit more vibrance. And we need that to affect our subject. So I'm going to select my subject up top over here so that when I add my adjustment layer, it comes up on top. And I'm going to click on curves. And just to make sure that I'm not seeing a visual change to the background layer, I'm going to make a clipping mask right away so that the curves adjustment layer only affects my subject and nothing else. Otherwise, if I leave it this way, the curves are going to adjust the entire image. But if I want to isolate the curves to just my subject, I need a clipping mask. So I'm going to right click, and I'm going to click on Create Clipping Mask. And that arrow tells me that it's only going to affect my subject. So now if I do something wild like that, it's just going to affect my subject. All right, I'm going to hit undo over here. And let's get to our goal, and that is to make her a little bit warmer to match that sunset. So I'm going to go into my red channel, and I'm going to click on my little tool up here because I want to select maybe her forehead, that skin tone, and affect her skin tone on her forehead. And on her forehead, it happens to be more on the highlight side than the midtones or the shadows. I could kind of also sneak in here under her chin, and that's going to be affecting more of the shadows. But I'm going to experiment and see what works best. Sometimes it is going to have to be a let's try it and see if it works. And then I can pull back or add more as I'm visually making judgment calls. So let's click over here on the top of her forehead first and add a little bit of red by clicking and pulling my mouse upwards to add. So very, very little, right? Doesn't have to be a crazy amount. It could be subtle, but it can make a big difference. So I'm not sure if you can see very well on the projector, but on the screen it looks a little bit more clear. When you turn that off and you turn that back on, it's a subtle difference, but it makes a huge difference. And sometimes that's all you need. Just a little bit of an adjustment in the red to make her feel a little bit warmer in that sunset. Okay. All right. And that's pretty much it for this image. You could kind of go into the shadows down here if you wanted to and kind of make a little bit of an adjustment. Add a little bit more red in that shadow. That's a little bit too much, a little bit too extreme. And if we bring down the red in the shadows, well, that part's a little too extreme too. So maybe just a small tweak, a small little bump. So before and after. And that looks a lot more natural now. And that's what we're trying to do. Sometimes, again, it's just smaller changes, small little tiny adjustments that can make a huge difference in the way that the background and the foreground or other layers look. Cool. So does that kind of answer the question that you had a little bit earlier? Does that make more sense?
No, it was something else we used where we put it into
All right. Well, we'll keep going.
But I think I know what you.
Well, we'll keep going. I have a few more examples that show a couple different things as well. We'll just keep going, and if I end up not answering your question, we can go one-on-one a little bit and nail it down.
I think it was under like image and then adjustments and then there's like a little box that pops up there maybe. Hold on.
So.
Maybe. Because there's a match color thing and I'm.
Yeah, so that was the next thing that I was going to show, but I was going to show that a little bit later.
That's fine.
Because, well, I can show that now. So I kind of showed you how you can kind of adjust that with curves and with levels on the last two, basically the last two images. But let's say the nice thing about it is that you have that control. You have that exact control of how things are going to end up and not have to rely on automations, right? Because if you rely on automations like filters or neural filters, a lot of the control that you have, you're putting it into the hands of the computer, right? So you might like the result that it comes out with, but you might not like the result that you come out with, right? So if you don't like the result that you come out with, you have to take that 80% that it took you and finish that 20%, right? So this is a great way just to know the basics of levels and of curves. But you could take these, highlight both of these layers that you want to basically color match, and inside of filters, let's do this. Select the subject because we want the subject to match to the background. So you can click on filter and click on neural filters. And it may have to download, but there is an option over here called harmonization. And if you click on that harmonization and turn it on, it might take a second or two to download. After it does, you can then select a reference layer. Since you have the subject selected, right, you can select your background layer, and then it will try to color match that automatically for you. So you can kind of adjust these sliders with how strong that color matching will be, whether or not you need to adjust the cyan, magenta, red. So in here where you're moving these sliders, it's sort of more of a manual thing. It's kind of like using levels. Yeah, harmonization. So you can kind of use this as almost a replacement to level, or I'm sorry, almost a replacement to curves, but you're not going to get as much control as you would with the curves layer. So I can output this to a new layer, or my current layer, or my smart filter. I'll click smart filter so that I can always go back and adjust things. But you can kind of have it automatically try to adjust it like this. Right, so it's going to try to do that job. You can make it a little bit darker if you needed to try to match, but it's basically kind of another way of using curves, but with sliders instead of the actual curves. So you're gonna not get as much control. So technically you can do that. You can click OK, and then that will make a little bit of a difference. If you turn off that smart filter, you can kind of see that it's matching that background. Of course, because that background we didn't add the levels to, it's actually making the image of our model a little brighter to match the background, while what we did manually was we used the levels to darken the background to make it a little bit more vibrant, and we matched our image or subject image to that background by adjusting the red. So two different methods. I think the curves and the levels are a much more accurate way, and it gives you a lot more control for your images to use it that method. So even though it could be a quick fix, like a button press or two, I still recommend the old school method, the manual method, because personally, I'm a control freak and I want to be able to adjust everything little bit by little bit manually. I want to be the judge. I want to be, as the artist, I want to be the judge and make that decision. I don't want to hand it off to AI or a computer to make that decision, because it takes that intentionality out of my hands. And so, yeah, that's that part. Okay, we also have a couple other examples, and we will do the yoga cutout and the color matching over here. I am going to use this match light and color JPEG, and I'm going to bring that into Photoshop over here. And I'm going to get this image of a desert. And I also have an image that's already been isolated and cut out of a lady doing yoga over here. So I'm going to drag and drop that PSD file right on top of my background image. Okay. And this is where I kind of have to make a couple additional judgment calls and visually. I have to decide how big she's going to actually be in here and her position in my environment. So if she's going to be that big, she needs to be a little bit closer to me, right? Or I can have her standing near the tree over here, but I can make her smaller. So it's up to me to decide how tall she needs to be next to that tree, what the scale is, and her position, right? So I have to make a decision visually on what makes sense of her position, where she is, and where I want to place her in the image. So Maybe I'll put her over here and make her just a little bit larger, just so we can see a little bit more detail. And then I can always readjust readjust where she is on the scene if I needed to. But this is a good start. Like right around here is good. And I'm going to hit enter to apply that image into my environment. And I'm going to do this exact same thing that I've done the last two images. I'm going to look at the levels. I'm going to zoom in a little bit too, so that I can really see how that's looking over here compared to the rest of the environment. And since I only want to affect my yoga cutout over here, in this case, I think the background is fine. I'm not going to make any adjustments to it. I'm going to adjust my yoga cutout to my background instead. Into my adjustment layers, I'm going to click on curves over here. And I'm going to go into my red because it's really warm out there in the desert. And she actually looks like there's a little bit too much blue in her, right? So I have to kind of make a visual judgment call. I have to look at the image, I have to analyze it myself and determine that, yeah, it's a little bit more blue than I want it to be. So there's a couple things that I can do for that, right? I can either go into my blue channel and try to remove blue, but if I remove blue, I might make her a little bit more yellow than I want, right? Because if I can look at this nice little guide in my levels, if I add more blue, it's going to get bluer. If I remove the blue, it's going to get a little bit more on the yellowy side over here, right? If I go into my green channel, if I add more green, it's going to get greener. But if I remove the green, I can kind of see a little bit more of a magenta-ish sort of color, right? So magenta might be a little bit more purpley than I want. So I'm going to focus on the actual red channel. And if I add red, it'll get redder. If I remove red, then it's going to get a little bit bluer. So here I want to add a little bit red. And again, I like using this tool over here so I can go directly into certain areas of the skin and select that bluish part of the skin that I don't want in there, or the bluish part of the pants that I might not want in there, and kind of bring down that blue by adding red so that it feels warmer. Okay? So up top over here, I'm just going to make her a little warmer. I'm going to click, whoops, let's make sure that I'm clicking on her. Also, let's create a clipping mask real quick so it just affects the yoga cutout. I forgot to add that step. Of course, you can do that later, but it's a lot better to see it happening with the background isolated. So let's go over here again, and we're going to click, and I'm going to add a little bit of red in here. Whoops, a little bit too far up. Just a slight bit of red over here. And then maybe a little bit more red down here, just to make her a little warmer. Now she's starting to look a little warmer. I still think there's a little bit too much blue in there. So rather than just adding red, we'll go to the blue and we'll start removing some of that blue. So again, I'm going to go over here to her arm and click down a little bit. I'm not going to go too far, right? Going too extreme kind of makes her look a little jaundiced, right? I don't want her having a liver disease. But I do want to get rid of some of that blue. Okay, so that's a little bit too much. Maybe around there. The same thing over here in these shadowy bits over here. I'm going to bring that down, bring the blue a little bit down a little bit like that. Okay, and now she's kind of looking a little bit more like she's in the light of that desert, right? So we can always preview, see the difference by turning it off and on. Okay, so there's a little bit more warmth in there. Okay, and I think that's looking pretty good. Like small adjustments sometimes make a huge difference. But with the lighting, I still think it could be maybe a little bit darker, right? We kind of want to match what's going on with the environment and her. So I think we need to bring down a little bit of brightness. So I'm going to add another either a a brightness and contrast layer here, or I can do it with levels, but I'm going to go with brightness and contrast. And I'm just going to adjust this to bring her a little bit less brighter. Maybe, yeah, somewhere around -11 looks good. And maybe add a little bit more contrast so we get some of those shadows showing up a little bit more and a little bit defined a little bit more over here to show off those muscles. And that's looking a lot more natural now. Okay. Also, let's make sure that we create a clipping mask because we want that just to affect her, not the entire image. And maybe now that we see that, I might bring the contrast ever so slightly down, maybe back down to 17. And that's looking pretty natural over here. So let's zoom out for a quick second and kind of see what that looks like before and after. Right. Looks like she doesn't belong in there, right? The color just doesn't match. But when we adjust that, now we kind of have a little bit more of a natural feel to that. Okay. One more thing that I wanted to kind of show. Although this image doesn't have the best shadows, so to speak, there is still a little bit of shadow that we can see, right? The sun is kind of coming up this way. It's the dune that's over here is kind of casting a shadow from here to here, right? And the light is catching it up top. We can kind of see that the tree is casting a very light gray shadow on the bottom going this way, right? It's a little, the color's a little off. And I kind of want to show you how you can add a shadow and pay close attention to those tiny little details. So the shadow is kind of falling that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use my yoga cutout as a shadow. So I'm going to create a copy of my yoga cutout. I'm going to duplicate that layer. And I'm going to call this yoga shadow. Oops, I want to put this under my yoga cutout, and I want to fix what happened. The two adjustment layers kind of remove the clipping mask since I added a new layer. And I want to make sure it still affects just that cutout. So I'm going to select both of those, and I'm going to create that clipping mask. And now with the shadow layer over here, I can create my shadow. So I'm going to right click and go into my blending modes or blending options, and I'm going to actually create a color overlay, and I'm going to make that black, and that's going to cause a silhouette. Basically, if I hide my cutout, making a silhouette of my yoga shadow here. And this is where I'm going to want to position the shadow in such a way that it matches the lighting in my image. So trying to match the shadows that are casting in the rest of my image. So just so I can see what's happening, I'm also going to show my yoga cutout, but I'm going to adjust my shadow by right-clicking on that shadow and, hitting Command T to transform that entire shadow. Actually, you know what we're going to do? We're going to make it a little easier, because if we hit Command T, it wants to do the entire layer, but we just kind of want to isolate it to that shape. So since we want to isolate it more, I'm actually going to hide this a little bit. And I'm going to create a smart object from this with a color overlay. So I'm going to right click and click on create convert to smart object. And now it's just this piece over here that I can then hit Command T on, right click, and then I can distort it. I like to use distort because it gives me control over each individual corner point here. So I can grab that corner, bring it down over here to this side like this, and grab this corner and bring it down to this side like this. And maybe I need to kind of adjust it more so it's that way. I can also adjust the bottom corner here as well. These two bottom corners like that. Kind of want to make it there. Bring that down this way. Something like that, right? So the shadow is sort of almost mimicking the direction that the shadow of that tree is over here. Okay? So that's just the placement first. We're going to add a little bit more details to that shadow to make it a little bit more realistic. Okay, so from here, we're going to just hit enter so that we can accept it if that's looking good to us. Maybe needs to be a little bit thinner, I think. Somewhere like that. And let me move that down under her rock there. Okay, and that's looking pretty decent. And I'm going to hit enter, and that's going to place that shadow there. Of course, I'm going to need a little bit more than just this black shadow, right? I'm going to want to maybe adjust the opacity on there and change the blend mode so that I can see a little bit more details on that sand on the bottom there. So let's start with bringing the opacity down. Somewhere like right over here. I'm trying to match what it might look like. And of course, I'm going to also change the blend mode to multiply. And I might need to make it a little bit more blurry. So to make it a little bit more blurry, I'm going to add a filter. Click on that shadow. And I'm going to go to filter and blur. And because I'm on a smart object now, I can control the blur and change it later if I need to. But I'm going to click on Gaussian blur over here. And let's see what it looks like with a little more. Something like that, actually. That's actually not looking too bad. Maybe around 19, right? I kind of want it to blend nicely, just like the shadow that's blending over here. And I'm going to click OK. All right. One thing that I'm noticing, though, is that the shadow is a little bit bluer over here, right? So I have a couple choices on how I can approach making that shadow more blue. I could go into my smart object and change the shadow's color from black overlay to more blue overlay, or I can add a curves adjustment layer and isolate the shadow and add more blue to it, right? So that's an option too. Let's click on that yoga shadow layer. I'll go to my curves over here. I'll create a clipping mask so that it only affects the shadow. I'll go into my blue, and then I'll add more blue into that into there. Okay. Actually, those are my midtones. I want it be on the shadow side, so over here, like that. And we'll add a little bit more blue over here to it. And if that's not really working, then we might need to actually go into our, let's delete that, into our yoga shadow over here, our smart object. And we can adjust that color overlay right over here and change that to a little bit more of a bluer shadow, somewhere around here, I guess. We still want it dark, right? We don't want to add too much blue. We don't want it that blue, right? But we want a little bit of, just a hint of that blue color, right? So a little bit lighter. So we'll hit OK over here and OK over here. And then we'll close that smart object and hit save. And then we can kind of see a little bit more of a natural bluer kind of color for that there. If that's not enough, you know, we can always go back and kind of adjust it a little bit more. Maybe make it a little bit lighter. And with a little bit of back and forth, you can kind of match that out. And it's subtle down here, right? Not really super in your face, but it's that small little adjustment that kind of gives it that realistic look, because you can see the shadow from the tree and you see a very subtle shadow from our yoga cutout right over here. Sometimes less is more. Sometimes more is more. You'll have to make that judgment call depending on the image that you're working with. Cool. So that's how you add an additional shadow to match the lighting. You want to consider where the light is coming from. You want to think about how other objects are casting their shadows, what direction they're casting it in, and how the shadow reacts with the environment that it's falling on, right? So it might not be completely black all the time. And it might need to be a little bit of a warmer shadow, or it might need to be a little bit of a cooler shadow. And you'll have to make those slight adjustments to see if you can make it work in your environment. Okay, one last example, and we're going to use these two images here, the sample image car composite 1 and car composite 2. And with this one, I'm going to actually show you a little bit more about matching the quality of the background image to the foreground image, because sometimes you're not going to get a perfectly sharp image for both images. There might be one that was taken a little bit at a different time, if it was taken at night, or if the lighting wasn't quite there, then you might have some grainy artifacts. So we want to match the quality of that image as well as the lighting and the shadows. So this one's going to have a little bit more involved in it. Let's open up sample image 1 first. And that's this car over here. I'm going to open up my composite image 2 over here as well. And that's this little road over here. And I'm going to try to move that car from one image to this other image. So we'll have to isolate our car image over here. We'll have to cut it out and bring it into the other image. And to kind of start us off over here, and to get us a nice accurate cutout, I'm going to want to play around with the levels a little bit so I can see if I can tease out any details that I might not be seeing in this image with the current levels that it's at right now. Because the shadow underneath over here kind of blocks me from seeing where the tires actually are. But we can take this as a twofold approach as well, though. We can use that shadow in our image, or we can isolate our car from that shadow and create our own shadow. I'm going to take the harder path, and I'm going to create our own shadow with this image. So I'm going to kind of tease out some of those details by going into my levels and bringing the white up a little bit, or a lot, or at least my midtones up a lot more. And I'm only using this just so I can tease out the details. And of course, the levels aren't really going to affect the cutout, but they will show me things that I'm missing over here. So with those midtones being shoved all the way to the left over here, I can see a lot of detail in this back end of the car, and I can create a much more accurate cutout manually now. Okay? And to do that, I'm also going to select my layer now, and I'm going to go over to select mask, and we're going to do our selected mask that we already know how to do. We're just going to get into it a little bit over here. So I'm going to just bring that transparency down over here, and I'm going to, hopefully, it'll do a decent job for me. We'll see. I'm going to hit select subject and see what that does. If it gets me 80% of the way there and I have to fix only 20%, that's better than having to do everything. So let's bring that transparency and see where it ended up. And actually, that's looking pretty good. I could spend a little bit more time in the details over here, getting some of these areas, but I think for the purposes of the demo, we can kind of pretend that it's a perfect cutout. And then we'll click OK over here. And for our output settings over here, I'm going to do a new layer with layer mask, and I'm going to click OK. Now I can get rid of this levels over here because I don't really need it anymore. Oops, there we go. Delete levels, yes. And now I have the car with almost a perfect cutout, exactly the way I want it, not affected by the levels. And I was able to get rid of that shadow down here because the levels, adjusting that midtone, allowed me to tease out some of the details from that darkness that I wasn't able to see before. Cool. That said, let's make this easy. I'm going to turn this into a smart object so I don't have to worry about the mask being affected by any changes that I want to make. So it'll almost be kind of like cut out on its own. All right, so convert to smart object. I'm going to name this car cutout. And then I can simply drag and drop that, or right click and duplicate layer and duplicate it into my car composite 2, since we're going to move it into that second file. So I'm going to click OK, go over to my car composite 2, and there it is in my layer panel. And I'm going to have to kind of figure out how I want to match it into my road here. Okay? I have, well, there's a few steps that we're going to have to take. We're going to have to do some color matching, right? And maybe some levels adjustments. And we're going to scale this down, right? And we might have to kind of use our distort or perspective to kind of place it in the area that we want. So let's start off with maybe just making it a little bit smaller over here so that it at least kind of fits on one side of the road. And we can decide, do you guys want to be in England or do you guys want to be in America? This kind of gives me almost kind of British vibe, right? Like Kirby the Love Bug and everything. So I kind of want to put him on the left side. Let's go on the left side. All right, cool. So we'll put it on the left side over here. And we'll kind of adjust it size-wise so that it kind of scales here. We might also want to kind of rotate it a little bit as well so it looks like it's even on the road. And that's looking all right. I can also right-click on that guy and hit distort and sort of play around with the perspective a little bit too. If I needed to sort of adjust ever so slightly its perspective. I don't think we need to. I think that's going to be fine the way it is. Just a little rotation was really all it needed. So we'll keep it like that. And enter to commit that change. Now comes the fun part of using curves. We can adjust the whole car And or we can adjust certain areas of the car. The window might need to have a little bit more adjusting than the entire car, right? Because I kind of like that blue. I kind of like the darkness of that, so I might not need to affect the levels too much because it happens to sort of almost fit in with the environment a little bit, with the reflections, but maybe some color adjustments. One main thing that sticks out to me is this back window over here. I can see through the window into the road, but that original image, and again, I have a little bit more green than I want in here as well. So I'll be creating an adjustment layer with my levels to bring that green down, maybe desaturate it a little bit so that it matches the road ahead. But if I don't want to affect the entire image, then I'll be using a layer mask on my adjustment layer so that it only affects the area that the mask is showing. So we'll do that. We'll go over here and, we'll go over here and we'll click on our curves. And we'll create a clipping mask. That'll make it a little bit easier. And inside of this white box over here, that's our mask, right? Kind of looks familiar. If we created a mask for the car cutout, right? There's our mask with black concealing and white revealing. Same thing with any adjustment layer that we have. We can add a mask on an adjustment layer. And black will conceal the effects of that adjustment layer, while white will reveal the effects of that adjustment layer. So we can go one of two ways. We can go ahead and either start adjusting the entire image over here, or we can just isolate the area that we want on our window over here for our mask. So what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use my polygonal lasso tool over here so I can make a nice selection. Obviously, there's a couple different ways that you can do this. You can use a brush and brush with black and white as well. But I think this is pretty sharp enough where I don't necessarily need to have super soft edges. So I'm just going to use my lasso tool over here and go into these areas and kind of create a rough selection of the area that I know that I want less blue in. Or I'm sorry, less green and yellow in. Another reason why I'm actually isolating the window here is because the window has a lot more of a green color cast. What just happened here? There it is. Okay, I got scared for a second. That pop-up. Okay. Over here, I'm going to fill that with black. And click OK. And then I'm going to hit Command D. And in here, I probably also want to hit Command I so that I can inverse that selection so that the, remember, white reveals, black conceals. Right now it's black, so it's concealing the effects inside of here. So if I hit Command I, whoops, not on the right layer. If I hit Command I on my mask, black turns to white and white turns to black. Command I, and then that swaps over. Now I can go into my curves, go into my green over here, And I can use that to adjust that green and bring down some of that green. Or actually probably not green, probably blue. It's a little bit more yellow than green. Let's go into my blue and add a little bit of blue. Get rid of that yellow that's in there. So now we're adding a little blue over here. We'll go into this area too. On the other side, we'll add a little bit more blue. Well, maybe not that much, a little bit less blue. Right around there. And that's going to then match a little bit better with my road over here. It's a little bit before and after. Now that's kind of looking more like my road. Okay. But I also have a little bit of green cast on top over here that I might not want. So little tiny details. So I can add another curves adjustment layer and use that same mask as a guide of what to include and what not to include. So kind of just like we were doing in our previous assignment for our transformation portrait, where we had kind of two different layer masks affecting the same layer because we copied it over. We're going to do the same thing with our curves, but we're going to affect each individual curves layer into affecting different parts of the car. So I'm going to add a new curves layer over here like that. We'll also create a clipping mask so it only affects this layer below it. And I'm actually going to copy this layer, this mask, into the curves layer. So to do that really quickly, I'm just going to actually delete that layer, that mask. Delete mask, yes, delete it. And I'm going to copy this mask by holding my Option button and placing it on top of my curves. That just copies the mask. But for this one, I actually don't want to reveal the window. I want to reveal the rest of the car, and I want to conceal the window. So I'm going to do the opposite of what this mask is. I'm going to hit Command-I again. Command-I. And now it's hiding whatever I do in this curves layer. It's going to hide. It's not going to affect that window. It's going to affect everything else. So now I can click on my curve icon here, and I can make any adjustments that I need to. So if I zoom in over here and I see a little bit more, too much green up here, then maybe I can go over here into my green and sort of just adjust that. Bring some of that green down a little bit, like that. Very subtle. I'm not trying to get rid of too much color, but just enough to where there's a little bit of a difference. It's a little bit warmer now too in this image. Okay, so before and after. Okay, so that's looking really great. Couple more things that I want to do, and that is to add a shadow manually under my car. And I'm going to do a simple shadow rather than using a copy of my car cutout. I can approach it in two different ways. I can see if a drop shadow works, and I think for this one, a drop shadow might work well because it's going to give me a little bit of a shape of that car, and the way that it's positioned, I'm going to put it directly below it. So a drop shadow could work just fine. Another option is to go with like an ellipse, right? I can create a black filled ellipse, no stroke. And I can just kind of place it underneath like that. Of course, I want to put it under my car cutout, so layer order matters. And then I can create with this, I can make it blurry, right? And then I can adjust it too. So that's another easy way to do it. So with my ellipse, I can click on filter, I can go to blur, Gaussian blur, convert my ellipse to a smart object. That's super fine. Click OK, and I can adjust how blurry it will be. Right? So if that's working for me around 40, 38 is fine. I'm going to click OK, and then I can make small adjustments. I can even sort of resize it if I needed to. Or I can hit the Shift button to make it a little deeper like that. Right? And kind of put it over there like that. And of course, I can adjust the opacity of how dark that shadow should be. Maybe click on multiply so some of the details might get shown through. Right. Other option, right click on the car cutout, click on blending modes, and our drop shadow right there. And then we'll have to sort of determine what size we want it to be, the spread we want it to have, and then of course, one easy way to determine angle and distance is to actually grab that shadow from the car itself. We don't want it all the way up there, but we do want to grab it and maybe move it on the bottom over here like that, right? So that's another method that you can use. Make it a little bit more opaque. Adjust it that way, and that is an option for you. I think in this case though, we might not necessarily want to see the wheels down there, maybe not looking too natural, but sometimes you can get away with a drop shadow as a shadow depending on how the subject is positioned, while other times the best way is to kind of create your own shadow by using different methods, such as drawing out a shape, blurring it, and creating that a shadow that way with basic shapes, or by using the car itself or the object itself to position where the shadow should be. All right, so that's looking really good with color matching over here. Let's zoom in though. And when we zoom in, we're going to notice that the background here has all this graininess to it, right? While our car is a lot sharper over here, right? It doesn't have that same granular feel as our background. And I think the easiest way to match quality would be to look for the lowest common denominator, right? So what's the worst quality image that you have in there? And if you can improve that quality of the image, awesome. But most of the time, that kind of graininess might not resolve itself to a nice sharp image. Even if you go into filters and try to, go into like noise and despeckle, or reduce noise. Sometimes it works okay, but the truth is you're probably not going to get a sharper image. So the best way to do it is to take your lowest quality image and match the rest of your layers to that. So that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to click on our car cutout over here on our layer, and I'm going to zoom in. Again, I'm looking at this graininess of the background. Whoops. Hit undo. I'm not sure what I did there. Okay. We want to match that graininess. So since there's grain, there's noise in our image, we're going to introduce noise to our car cutout layer to bring the quality a little bit down to match the rest of the image. So with our car cutout selected, we're going to go over to filter. We're going to go to noise, and we're going to add noise. And there's a couple options that we have when we add noise. Right now it says amount 12%. By default, it just threw that in there. And this is where we can kind of decide if that is enough noise or if we need less noise. If it's too much, then we need to pull back. There's a couple different options that we have as well. We have uniform and Gaussian, and then we have the option for monochromatic. Right now, monochromatic is turned off, so when we zoom in real tightly, we can kind of see that the noise over here has this color in it, right? If we zoom in super close, we see all this like RGB color on here for that noise. If we click on monochromatic, that's going to get rid of the RGB distortions there and make them black and white distortions. Right? And we might need black and white or monochromatic, or we might need color. We have to make that judgment call by looking at the background environment and see how that background looks. Right? So if we zoom in real tight like this, we can kind of see that it's kind of looking uniform, right? With the background. I'm not sure where the background is and where the car is based on how zoomed in I am over here, right? It's kind of got that same feel to it. If I zoom out a little bit, there we go. I was on the road, now I'm in the trees, and I'm looking over here, and that's actually looking pretty decent. I can also explore with Gaussian. Gaussian is gonna give me a little bit of a different look for my noise. But I think in this case, for this particular image, uniform is going to be the best way to match it. And again, if it's a little bit too noisy, we can kind of explore, bring down the noise a little bit and see if that will make any big difference to the quality of it. Okay, we can use this slider to kind of see. And I think probably maybe around 8 was pretty decent. Yeah, somewhere around 8. We kind of want to match it, right? We don't want it to be too much noisy. We want it about the same noise that our background has. And once we're happy with that, which I am at 8% in uniform and monochromatic, every image is going to be different, so it may need a little bit of a different adjustment. It's going to be your judgment call. But once you click OK over here, that's going to look pretty decent. We might also consider doing the same thing with our shadow that we added down here. Whoops. So if we have our ellipse tool over here, we can do the same thing. We can go to Filter, and we can click on Add Noise. If we click on Add Noise on top over here, it's going to give us the exact same settings that we used previously. Or if you wanted to get more granular and have a little bit more control, you can also go back down to Noise, Add Noise, and adjust the shadow based on what you want it to be. I want it uniform. I'm going to go ahead and hit Add Noise on top, like that, and click OK. And that will add that noise to my shadow. If I bring down the opacity a little bit, I can see some of that noise. But I kind of want it darker over here like it was in the original more. So we're going to keep it that way. But everything now has noise that matches the rest of this image. I'm going to hit Command and 0 just to center everything. And I can kind of see that it looks uniform. It looks exactly like it would belong there. The lighting, the shadow, the noise in the image all come together to create a cohesive look that looks like I took a picture with the same camera. Right? If I get rid of all these smart filters on my car and I get rid of all this, you can see a huge difference in the composition and how it looks. Cool, so that will do it for the composition tutorial. Obviously, it can get a little bit more complex the more layers that you're adding into your composition. Each one will need to be adjusted and thought about where it belongs in terms of scale, in terms of shadows, in terms of lighting, in terms of image quality. So the more details you can kind of think to adjust, the more realistic things will end up looking. Okay. There's also extra adjustments that you can kind of do, like adding colors and painting, kind of like makeup almost. So for example, might not look right, but we're going to try it just as an example. I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to use my paintbrush. And let's say let's imagine there was an explosion in the background, some action scene that was happening. James Bond is running away from bad guys in his in his Beetle. But there's big explosions happening, so we want to reflect that that happening, and we might not be able to do that with a curves adjustment layer, because a curves adjustment layer will affect the entire image. If we just want a highlight of a orangey or reddish explosion, then we can take our adjustment layer here, or a regular layer here, use our brush tool, and either we can use like a cool brush set, or we can just kind of add a little bit of a glow or highlight. I already put this in it actually came in automatically as a clipping mask, which is perfect because then we can just adjust the image itself over here. So let's make it a little bit more orangey over here. Let's do that. And then I'm just going to quickly sort of brush that side in orange like that. And with that, I can actually kind of turn that into a glow or a highlight, where I can adjust the blend mode to make it something that would make more sense if there was an explosion in the background. Let's say, color burn actually looks pretty good over here with that orange. Kind of gives it that reflection. And then maybe up here like that, and it almost looks like there's a reflection of a fireball that he's running away from, right? So you can use layers with color and blend modes to kind of add even more lighting effects to make it super dramatic, if you like. And that will all depend on what blend mode you use to make it look more realistic. And again, I think color burn worked really well there. Multiply, not so much. Color burn's looking good. There we go. We're running away from a fireball in the background there. So you can even go into those details like that and select different colors to see how that affects your image and certain areas of that image. So you can do a lot of fun stuff and really make it look like it belongs, and really tell a cool story with dramatic effect by using color and lighting and making sure everything kind of looks cohesive. Awesome. So that concludes the tutorial on compositing. Feel free to take a look at that video that we just recorded for reference at any time. I'm going to post a link on Blackboard for everybody. And I'm looking forward to seeing your next project, which will be focusing on using these compositing techniques to create a themed project that we will be voting on next week. Or not next week, after spring break. All right, enjoy. Good luck.